Before he became one of the most influential businessmen in the world, Jack Ma was just a curious boy from a quiet city in China. He wasn't strong or wealthy or particularly gifted in school, but he was endlessly curious about people, about the world, and about ideas. Long before the internet, before computers filled his life, Jack was simply a dreamer, trying to make sense of his place in a fast-changing world. He didn't know it yet, but those questions would one day build an empire. Jack Ma was born in 1964 in Hangzhou, a city surrounded by green hills and calm lakes. It was a beautiful place, but in those years, China was still closed off from much of the outside world. Foreign visitors were rare, television was new, and information moved slowly. The country was healing from political and social turmoil, and opportunity was scarce. But for a child like Jack, who wanted to understand everything, even limits became lessons. He was a small boy, often bullied for his size. He got into fights, not out of anger, but because he refused to back down. When he failed, he got up again and again. He once said, "I was never a good student. I failed so many times that I stopped counting." But those failures taught him resilience, and resilience became his hidden strength. As a teenager, Jack became fascinated by something unusual in his city, the sound of English. At the time, Hangzhou had opened its first international hotel, and a few tourists began visiting from abroad. Young Jack saw them as windows to another world. Every morning before sunrise, he rode his old bicycle to the hotel, sometimes for hours, just to talk to strangers. He offered to guide them around the city, not for money, but for conversation. That simple act changed everything. By listening to visitors, Jack learned not just a language, but a worldview. He discovered humor, honesty, and perspectives that didn't exist in his classroom. He was learning how people thought, how they felt, and how they dreamed. Those early mornings became his real education, not in grammar, but in empathy. One day, Jack met an American family who were so moved by his kindness that they became lifelong friends. They later gave him his English name, Jack. To them, it was a small gesture. To him, it was the start of a new identity, a bridge between two worlds. He didn't realize it then, but that simple name would one day be known across the planet. Jack's parents were traditional performers of pingtan, a form of Chinese folk storytelling. They lived modestly, earning little, but they valued art and perseverance. From them, Jack inherited not just creativity, but rhythm, the art of telling stories that captivate the human heart. In some ways, he was destined to communicate, whether through language, teaching, or business. He just didn't know the form it would take yet. When it came time for university, Jack faced another wall. He failed the college entrance exam, not once, but twice. Each failure was devastating, but he refused to surrender. On his third attempt, he finally passed, earning admission to Hangzhou Normal University to study English. At university, Jack's energy was contagious. He wasn't the smartest student, but he was the most active. He organized clubs, hosted debates, and constantly encouraged others to speak with confidence. He practiced English with anyone who would listen, and soon became one of the most fluent speakers on campus. For the first time, he began to believe he might have a future larger than his surroundings. After graduation, Jack became an English teacher at a local university. He earned around $12 a month, barely enough to live on. But he loved teaching. He loved the exchange of ideas, the spark in a student's eyes when they understood something new. For Jack, those classroom moments were richer than money. His students remember him as animated, passionate, and endlessly encouraging. He wasn't just teaching grammar, he was teaching optimism. He told them, "Don't be afraid of failure. The most important thing is to never give up." Those words weren't motivational slogans. They were the lessons of his own life. Every rejection he'd faced had become a story he could share. But outside the classroom, Jack's life was filled with rejection. He applied for dozens of jobs, in hotels, in the police force, even as a waiter. Each time, he was turned down. When KFC opened in Hangzhou, 24 people applied, 23 were hired. Jack was the only one rejected. He laughed about it later, calling it good practice for life, but at the time, it hurt deeply. He felt invisible, like the world had no place for him. Yet something in him refused to stop trying. He often said later, "If you never give up, you still have a chance. Giving up is the greatest failure." By the early 1990s, China was beginning to change. Foreign companies were arriving, technology was emerging, and the first whispers of a global economy began to reach Hangzhou. Jack, curious as always, saw opportunity where others saw confusion. He started a small translation business to help local companies talk with foreign clients. It wasn't glamorous, but it opened doors he never expected. In 1995, Jack was invited to the United States as a translator for a trade delegation. It was his first trip outside of China, and it would change his life forever. In a small office in Seattle, he saw something he had never seen before, a computer connected to the Internet. It was slow, noisy, and strange, but to Jack, it was magic. He typed the word beer and saw pages appear. Then he typed China. Nothing came up. That moment hit him like lightning. How could there be no information about his country on the Internet? He felt a sudden, powerful realization that this technology would change everything, and that someone had to bring China online. He didn't know how, but he decided that someone would be him. When he returned to Hangzhou, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He told his friends and students that the Internet would one day connect every business in China to the world. Most of them laughed. They thought it was impossible, especially coming from a teacher who didn't know how to use a computer. But Jack had never let doubt stop him before. He gathered a few friends and started his first company, China Pages, one of China's earliest online directories. It aimed to help businesses create their first digital profiles. He worked from a small apartment, learning as he went, teaching himself how to navigate a digital world that didn't yet exist in his country. But the idea was far ahead of its time. The project failed, leaving him broke and disheartened. Most people would have stopped there. But Jack didn't see failure. He saw proof that the dream was possible. He said, "If you keep your dream alive, one day it will come true. It just takes time." And deep down, he believed that the Internet was not just a tool, it was the future of human connection. He just had to wait for the world to catch up. Late at night, when the city grew quiet, Jack would sit by his window, staring into the darkness, wondering what would come next. He had no money, no investors, and no clear plan. But he had a feeling that something extraordinary was coming. All his life he had been preparing for moments like this without even realizing it. Every rejection, every failure, every early morning at the hotel, they were all leading him here. And so, in that small apartment in Hangzhou, surrounded by the echoes of past mistakes, a new vision began to take shape. The world hadn't heard his name yet, but soon it would, because Jack Ma, the boy who failed his exams, the teacher who was rejected by KFC, was about to build something that would change China forever. And it all started with a simple question. What if connection could change everything? When Jack Ma returned from the United States, his heart carried something far greater than souvenirs or memories. He carried a vision of connection. He had seen the Internet with his own eyes, a network of invisible roads where information could travel freely, where distance and power didn't matter. For a man who had spent his life trying to bridge gaps between people, this was more than technology. It was destiny. He began to speak to anyone who would listen, friends, students, even government officials. Jack tried to explain what he had seen. The Internet will change everything, he told them, and China must not be left behind. Most people smiled politely and walked away. Some thought he was crazy. Others thought he was dreaming too big. But Jack had never let disbelief stop him before. After the failure of China Pages, Jack was exhausted but not defeated. The project had taught him how far ahead of his time he really was. He realized that timing was everything, and that sometimes the world needed a few more years to understand your idea. But in those quiet years, he kept learning, kept teaching, and kept waiting for the right moment. That moment would arrive in 1999. By then, the Internet was no longer a mystery. It was spreading fast across the world, and whispers of online business were beginning to reach China. The word e-commerce was new, but Jack understood its meaning immediately. He saw the Internet as a marketplace without walls, one that could give small businesses the same power as global giants. That vision would become the seed of Alibaba. Jack gathered 17 of his closest friends and former students into his tiny apartment in Hangzhou. The room was small, filled with cheap chairs and big dreams. On the wall, he drew diagrams of how a website could help Chinese businesses reach the world. He told them, "If we can help one small business make a single deal online, we've already made a difference." There was no business plan, no investors, only belief. Most of his friends didn't fully understand what the Internet was, but they understood Jack. They trusted his passion. They saw how his eyes lit up when he spoke about connection and opportunity. One by one, they agreed to join him, some investing their small savings, others offering to work without pay. They didn't know it, but that day marked the birth of something historic. Jack named the company Alibaba. It came from the story of Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. He loved the phrase, "open sesame," a symbol of hidden treasure waiting to be unlocked. To him, the Internet was that treasure, and small businesses were the key holders who needed a little magic to open the gates. The name was simple, memorable, and easy to pronounce across languages. Exactly what he wanted. In those early days, Alibaba had no fancy office, no technology, and no reputation. The team shared a single computer and used Jack's apartment as their headquarters. They worked long nights fueled by tea, laughter, and uncertainty. Sometimes Jack's wife cooked noodles for everyone because they couldn't afford much else. But there was something powerful in that small room, a shared belief that they were building the future. The company's first website was basic, but its purpose was clear: to help Chinese manufacturers find buyers overseas. It wasn't glamorous, but it was practical. And in business, practicality wins. Jack's idea spread slowly at first, but soon small factories and local merchants began noticing. They realized Alibaba could connect them directly to foreign clients, cutting out expensive middlemen. That was revolutionary. Still, it wasn't easy. China's internet infrastructure was weak, and few people even owned computers. Investors didn't understand e-commerce. Many thought Jack was chasing a fantasy. But Jack didn't care about their doubts. He told his team, "If we don't try, we'll regret it for the rest of our lives." That conviction gave them strength when money and hope ran low. Jack believed in one thing above all else: trust. He often said, "If you want to do business online, you must first build trust offline." To him, Alibaba wasn't just a company, it was a community. He focused on relationships, honesty, and the power of reputation. Even when technology failed, those values held everything together. When Alibaba began attracting attention from abroad, Jack faced a new challenge. Investors wanted to take control. Some offered large sums of money, but demanded to run the company their way. Jack refused. He told his team, "We will grow slow, but we will grow right. The customer is number one, the employee is number two, and the shareholder is number three." It was an idea unheard of in the business world, but it worked. In 1999, Alibaba finally secured its first major investment from Goldman Sachs and a group of Silicon Valley firms. It wasn't just money, it was validation. Suddenly, people who once laughed at Jack began to listen. But even then, Jack stayed humble. He reminded his team, "This money is not ours. It belongs to the dream we serve." His leadership wasn't built on power, it was built on vision. As the company grew, Jack faced fierce competition. Local rivals and foreign giants tried to dominate the Chinese market. Many had more funding, better technology, and global experience. But Jack's secret weapon wasn't money, it was understanding. He knew Chinese businesses better than anyone. He knew their fears, their habits, and their hopes. He built Alibaba for them, not for Wall Street. He once told his team, "We are not here to compete with big companies. We are here to serve the small guys. If we help them win, we will win too." That philosophy became Alibaba's compass. While others chased profits, Alibaba chased purpose, and that purpose created loyalty money could never buy. Despite progress, the path was brutal. Servers crashed, deals fell through, and government rules shifted without warning. Some employees quit, exhausted and uncertain. Jack didn't blame them. Instead, he gathered the remaining team and told them a story of how bamboo bends but never breaks. "We are that bamboo," he said softly. "We might bend, but we will not break." One of Alibaba's biggest turning points came when Jack decided to make the company free to use. Competitors charged businesses to list their products, but Jack saw that as a wall blocking small players. He tore that wall down. His decision shocked everyone. How could they make money if it was free? Jack smiled and said, "First, we make people happy. Then we find our way." That moment changed everything. Traffic exploded. Thousands of businesses joined, and Alibaba's name spread like wildfire. Jack's little idea had become a national phenomenon. Suddenly, small shop owners from distant provinces were shipping goods across continents. For them, Alibaba wasn't just a website. It was hope in digital form. By 2000, Alibaba had become one of the most recognized internet companies in China. Journalists called Jack the face of a new China, but success brought pressure. The dot-com bubble was beginning to burst in America, and global investors were pulling out of tech. Jack knew that the storm was coming. He gathered his team and said, "We cannot depend on capital forever. We must depend on our customers." That philosophy saved Alibaba when others collapsed. During those uncertain months, Jack did what he always did best. He inspired. He told his employees stories about struggle, about persistence, and about believing in impossible things. He said, "Today is hard, tomorrow will be worse, but the day after tomorrow will be sunshine. Most people die tomorrow night." His words weren't poetic, they were prophetic. Alibaba survived the crash, not because of luck, but because of discipline and heart. While others cut corners, Jack doubled down on values. He focused on quality, trust, and long-term vision. When the market recovered, Alibaba was stronger than ever, proof that slow growth built on integrity could outlast any trend. In just a few years, Jack Ma had transformed from an English teacher earning $12 a month to the leader of one of China's most promising tech companies. But deep inside, he still saw himself as a teacher. He never gave lectures about money, only about dreams, perseverance, and responsibility. To him, Alibaba was a classroom, and the world was his student. Late one night, as the team celebrated another small victory, Jack looked around the room. The faces had changed. More people, more computers, more noise. But the spirit was the same. It was still about connection, still about belief. He raised his glass and said quietly, "Remember why we started. It's never about the money. It's about making things possible for others." The world outside was changing fast. China was entering a new era of technology and globalization. But for Jack Ma, this was only the beginning. Alibaba was still small compared to what it could become. The world hadn't yet seen its full power, or his. And as the lights dimmed in that Hangzhou office, one thought lingered in Jack's mind like a quiet promise. The real journey has just begun. By the early 2000s, Alibaba was no longer just a small experiment in Jack Ma's apartment. It had become a symbol of hope for countless entrepreneurs across China. But with growth came new challenges. The company had survived its fragile beginnings, yet the real test, scaling a dream into a global empire, was only beginning. Jack understood that survival was not the same as success. To him, building a company was like raising a child, full of mistakes, patience, and love. Every step forward brought a new set of problems. He told his team, "Don't celebrate too soon. We are still a baby learning to walk." Those words reminded everyone that humility was more important than headlines. Around 2003, a crisis struck China that threatened everything. The SARS epidemic spread rapidly, forcing millions to stay home. Offices closed, businesses froze, and fear gripped the nation. For many companies, it was the end. But for Alibaba, it became a turning point that would change history. With people confined indoors, traditional shopping was impossible. Jack saw this not as a setback, but as a moment of opportunity. If people couldn't go to markets, then markets must come to them. That single realization gave birth to Taobao, an online marketplace that would redefine how China shopped. Taobao was bold. It allowed anyone to set up an online store for free, something unheard of at the time. Competitors like eBay had already entered China, backed by billions of dollars and global experience. But Jack knew that eBay didn't understand Chinese culture. "They are like sharks in the ocean," he said. "We are like crocodiles in the Yangtze River. If we fight in the ocean, we lose. But in our river, we win." His strategy was simple: localize everything. From language to payment systems, Taobao was built for Chinese users, by Chinese people. Instead of cold business listings, the platform encouraged personal connections between buyers and sellers. Shopping became social, filled with chat boxes, emojis, and trust built through conversation. That human touch became Taobao's greatest weapon. At first, eBay underestimated Alibaba. They believed that money and brand power could crush any local rival. But Jack's team worked day and night, improving features, listening to users, and adapting quickly. When eBay charged sellers for listings, Taobao stayed free. When eBay ignored small sellers, Taobao celebrated them. In the end, it wasn't technology that won. It was empathy. Within 2 years, Taobao had overtaken eBay in China. It was a stunning victory, one that shocked the global tech world. Journalists called it the miracle of Hangzhou. But Jack simply smiled. "We didn't defeat eBay," he said. "We served our customers better, that's all." His humility was disarming, but his leadership was unstoppable. Yet, as Taobao grew, one problem became clear: payments. Most Chinese people didn't trust online transactions. Credit cards were rare, and scams were common. Without trust, e-commerce couldn't thrive. So Jack and his team built Alipay, a digital payment system that held money in escrow until buyers confirmed their orders. It was a simple idea, but it solved a massive cultural barrier. Banks and regulators criticized the move, calling it risky and even illegal. But Jack stood firm. "If someone must go to jail for innovation," he said, "let it be me." His courage paid off. Alipay became the backbone of China's digital economy, turning fear into confidence and trust into growth. With Taobao and Alipay together, Alibaba became unstoppable. The ecosystem connected millions of sellers and buyers, powering a new kind of capitalism, one driven by the dreams of ordinary people. From small-town artisans to factory owners, everyone could now reach customers worldwide. Jack often said, "We don't create jobs, we create platforms for others to create jobs." But success came with pressure. Alibaba's rapid expansion demanded more funding, technology, and international exposure. In 2005, a powerful ally appeared. Yahoo invested $1 billion for a 40% stake in Alibaba. The deal shocked China's business world. For Jack, it wasn't just about money, it was about global recognition. The world was finally watching. With new resources, Alibaba expanded aggressively. It launched new services, improved logistics, and started shaping what we now call the digital economy. Jack's philosophy guided every move: customers first, employees second, shareholders third. It wasn't a slogan, it was a rule. Anyone who joined Alibaba learned that purpose always came before profit. Inside the company, Jack's leadership style was unusual. He wasn't a typical CEO obsessed with spreadsheets or numbers. He was a storyteller, a motivator, a dreamer. He spoke in metaphors, comparing business to martial arts and leadership to water. Be like water, he said, soft enough to adapt, strong enough to break rocks. His words turned into the heartbeat of Alibaba's culture. Employees adored him because he understood struggle. He didn't lead from an ivory tower. He walked among them, listened to their worries, and shared their late-night noodles. When morale was low, he'd tell stories of failure, not to discourage, but to remind them that pain was part of progress. "We are born poor," he'd say, "but we don't have to die poor." By 2008, Alibaba faced its biggest test yet, the global financial crisis. While American companies collapsed, Jack urged his team not to panic. "Crisis means opportunity," he told them. He knew that small businesses around the world would suffer, but he also knew they would need new ways to survive. Alibaba became their lifeline, helping thousands of companies move their sales online. During those dark months, Jack worked tirelessly. He encouraged his employees to focus on helping others rather than chasing profits. His belief was simple: when you serve people in hard times, they will never forget you. That philosophy transformed Alibaba from a Chinese company into a global force. As the crisis eased, Alibaba launched Tmall, a premium platform for big brands. It allowed trusted companies to sell directly to consumers, giving shoppers both choice and security. Together, Taobao and Tmall became the twin pillars of China's e-commerce empire. And in the center of it all stood Jack Ma, the former English teacher who had once failed university entrance exams twice. But Jack never saw himself as a billionaire or a tech mogul. He saw himself as a teacher, still sharing lessons. He traveled across China, giving talks about entrepreneurship and perseverance. His message was always the same: don't complain. Use your time to solve problems. Opportunity lies where others see difficulty. Those words resonated deeply with a generation searching for hope. Under Jack's leadership, Alibaba grew beyond anyone's imagination. It became a universe of platforms, from e-commerce to finance, from logistics to cloud computing. The company's influence touched nearly every corner of China's economy. But for Jack, the measure of success was never money. It was impact. He often said, "If Alibaba can't help society, it doesn't deserve to exist." In 2014, Alibaba reached a milestone that stunned the world: its IPO on the New York Stock Exchange. It became the largest public offering in history, raising $25 billion. The same man who once couldn't get a job at KFC was now ringing the opening bell on Wall Street. The world called him a genius. Jack called it a miracle of ordinary people. On that day, standing under the bright lights of New York, Jack looked calm but emotional. He told reporters, "Today is not about me. It's about all the dreamers who never gave up." His words captured everything he stood for: humility, vision, and the belief that greatness comes from persistence, not privilege. After the IPO, Alibaba's reach expanded globally. It became a bridge between East and West, connecting cultures and markets. But even with fame and power, Jack remained grounded. He still practiced Tai Chi, still told jokes, still smiled like a man who remembered his humble beginnings. Success hadn't changed him. It had only deepened his gratitude. Jack often said that leadership is about energy, not authority. He believed that a great leader doesn't push people. They inspire them to move. Inside Alibaba, He was known not for giving orders, but for giving hope. That, more than any business strategy, became the secret to Alibaba's rise. As the world embraced e-commerce, Jack began thinking beyond business. He spoke about education, sustainability, and the future of work. Machines will be smarter, he warned, but humans must be wiser. His vision began to evolve, from building a company to building a legacy. By the late 2010s, Alibaba had become one of the most valuable companies on earth. But for Jack, the true victory was invisible. Millions of people lifted from poverty, millions of dreams realized, millions of entrepreneurs who finally had a chance. "My job," he said, "is to make sure others succeed." And so, from a small apartment in Hangzhou to the global stage, Jack Ma's story became a modern legend, a story of courage, resilience, and belief. He showed the world that success isn't built on money or connections, but on conviction, that even a man who started with nothing could build something that changed everything. In the quiet of his success, Jack once said, "When you're small, you should focus on making others great. When you're big, you should focus on making the world better." Those words weren't just advice, they were a promise. Alibaba had risen, but Jack's journey was far from over. The teacher was becoming a philosopher, and the company he built was about to face challenges that would test its soul. But one truth remained unshaken. Jack Ma had already proven that the impossible could be done. After 2 decades of relentless work, Jack Ma had transformed from an English teacher into one of the most recognizable figures in global business. Alibaba was no longer just a company. It had become a living ecosystem, a digital nation connecting hundreds of millions of people. But as the empire reached new heights, Jack began asking himself a question he hadn't asked in years. What comes after success? Jack had always believed that power and fame could be dangerous if they weren't balanced with purpose. In the years following Alibaba's historic IPO, he found himself reflecting more deeply on the meaning of leadership. He once said, "When you're too busy making money, you forget why you started." Those words captured his quiet shift, from building a business to building meaning. Even as Alibaba's influence expanded across Asia, Jack was thinking beyond profit. He saw a future where technology could heal inequality, where education could reach every child, and where entrepreneurs in small villages could thrive just like those in major cities. To him, wealth was only valuable if it empowered others. "If we have money," he said, "we should use it to solve problems for society." In 2014, after years of intense pressure and success, Jack decided to take a step back from the front lines. While still guiding Alibaba's vision, he started investing more time in philanthropy. He founded the Jack Ma Foundation, focusing on education, entrepreneurship, and the environment. His mission was simple but profound: to help the world's forgotten dreamers find a path forward. Education remained the closest to his heart. As a former teacher, he never forgot the classrooms of Hangzhou, the dusty blackboards, and the children who believed too little in their own potential. He began visiting schools across rural China, bringing teachers new resources, training, and hope. He told them, "A good teacher can change a student's life. A great teacher can change a community." Those words became the guiding principle of his foundation. Jack also started to speak on global stages, from the United Nations to the World Economic Forum. But his talks were different from typical business speeches. They weren't filled with numbers or charts, they were filled with philosophy. He spoke about happiness, empathy, and balance, ideas rarely discussed in corporate boardrooms. "Don't teach your children to be rich," he once said. "Teach them to be kind." His words struck a chord with millions. In an age of cold algorithms and rapid automation, Jack reminded people that humanity mattered more than efficiency. He often warned that the 21st century's greatest challenge wouldn't be competition between nations, but between humans and machines. "We must teach our children creativity, values, and independent thinking," he said. That's how we stay ahead of technology, not by coding faster, but by thinking deeper. While he was preaching balance, the pace of Alibaba's expansion never slowed. New ventures like Ant Financial, AliCloud, and Kineo Logistics began shaping China's entire digital infrastructure. Yet even as these projects grew, Jack remained humble. He reminded his team that innovation meant nothing without compassion. If technology makes people richer but not happier, he asked, is it really progress? As Alibaba became a pillar of China's economy, Jack's fame soared beyond business. He appeared on magazine covers, met world leaders, and even shared stages with musicians and presidents. But fame was never what he wanted. "I'm not born for luxury," he once said. "I'm born to teach." Deep down, he still saw himself as that curious boy from Hangzhou who wanted to connect people through understanding. By 2017, Jack began preparing Alibaba for a future without him. He understood that true leadership meant letting go. "A great company should not depend on one person," he said. "It should depend on a system of people who believe in a mission." So he began mentoring a new generation of leaders within Alibaba, ensuring that the company's spirit, not his presence, would carry it forward. The world was changing fast. Trade wars, digital regulation, and political tension made life harder for tech giants. Jack, always outspoken, continued to speak about open markets and innovation. But as Alibaba grew more powerful, his public comments became riskier. In late 2020, his criticism of global financial systems drew attention and consequences. His speeches, once celebrated, now sparked controversy. Then, almost overnight, Jack disappeared from public view. For months, he remained silent. The media speculated endlessly. Had he retired? Was he being silenced? Had he simply chosen peace? The truth was less dramatic but deeply human. Jack was retreating to reflect, to rest, and to rediscover what truly mattered. When he finally reappeared, he looked calmer, more grounded. The fire in his voice was still there, but softer now, like a teacher speaking from experience rather than ambition. He began talking less about business and more about harmony, responsibility, and the next generation. "I realized," he said quietly, "that the world doesn't need another big company. It needs more good people." His absence from the spotlight made him almost mythical, but to those who knew him, it was simply Jack returning to his roots, a man who valued wisdom over power. In his silence, he had found perspective. He started traveling to rural areas again, meeting farmers, teachers, and young entrepreneurs. Each story reminded him why he began his journey decades ago. Meanwhile, Alibaba continued to evolve under new leadership. The company diversified, faced regulatory challenges, and adapted to new global realities. Yet through all the turbulence, Jack's philosophy remained the foundation. "Never give up on your values," he had told his team. "Money can vanish. Vision cannot." Those words guided them through every storm. Jack's influence stretched beyond business. His ideas reshaped how China viewed entrepreneurship. Before Alibaba, failure was shameful. After Alibaba, it became a sign of courage. His belief in perseverance created a cultural shift. He showed that being different, being crazy enough, could be the key to greatness. "Today is hard," he often said. "Tomorrow will be worse. But the day after tomorrow will be sunshine." That quote became a symbol of endurance for millions. It was written on office walls, printed on graduation banners, and whispered by founders in the dark nights of their startups. Jack's optimism had become contagious, even in uncertainty. He gave people permission to dream beyond their circumstances. In the years that followed, Jack's philanthropic work deepened. He began focusing on environmental sustainability, urging companies to balance profit with planet. "We can't build a beautiful business on a dying earth," he said. His foundation funded clean water projects, supported wildlife conservation, and encouraged green entrepreneurship. For Jack, business and nature were no longer separate. They were partners. He also invested heavily in rural education, launching programs that rewarded excellent teachers and helped remote schools integrate technology. He once told a group of educators, "If we teach one child to dream differently, we change the future of a village." That belief turned his foundation into one of China's leading forces for educational reform. As time passed, Jack's public life grew quieter. He appeared at fewer events, spoke less often, and preferred the simplicity of travel and reflection. Some saw it as retirement, others saw it as evolution. But Jack never saw his journey as finished. He said, "A teacher never really retires, we just change classrooms." His new classroom was the world, a vast, interconnected space where ideas, technology, and humanity all collided. He continued mentoring young founders, encouraging them to see business not just as competition, but as service. "If you help others win," he told them, "you'll always find your own victory." Jack Ma's legacy today is not just Alibaba's trillion-dollar valuation or its global reach. It's the mindset he left behind, that success comes from serving others, not from conquering them, that courage and kindness can coexist, that even in failure there's a lesson worth cherishing. He once summarized his philosophy in a simple way. "When I started Alibaba, I wanted to change my life. When it grew, I wanted to change others' lives. Now, I just want to change the world for the better." It was the evolution of a dream, from survival to significance. In many ways, Jack's story reflects the story of modern China, a journey from isolation to innovation, from scarcity to abundance, from imitation to creation. And just like his homeland, Jack's spirit continues to evolve, restless, inventive, and endlessly hopeful. As he looks toward the future, Jack speaks of his next mission: nurturing education through digital tools, supporting young teachers, and inspiring students to think beyond borders. "The future belongs to dreamers," he says, "but only if we teach them how to dream." Today, when people think of Jack Ma, they don't just think of a billionaire or a founder. They think of a symbol of resilience, kindness, and vision. The boy who once failed exams and couldn't get a job became a beacon for those who dare to believe that imagination can change destiny. In the end, Jack's legacy isn't measured in dollars or data. It's measured in minds awakened and hearts inspired. His journey reminds us that success is never about where you start, but how deeply you believe in your path. And somewhere in Hangzhou, as the sun sets over the West Lake, you can almost imagine him standing quietly, the teacher who never stopped learning, the dreamer who never stopped dreaming. In his calm gaze there is no pride, only peace. The peace of a man who turned failure into faith and faith into a force that changed the world. Every great story eventually becomes a lesson, and Jack Ma's story is no exception. His life, filled with failures, persistence, and imagination, has evolved into a collection of teachings that continue to inspire dreamers worldwide. For the next generation, his journey is not just history, it's a guidebook for how to think, how to lead, and how to live with purpose. Jack often said that life is about the choices we make when everything seems uncertain. When he was rejected from college, when no one believed in his company, when the world laughed at his vision, he chose to keep believing. That choice became his philosophy, optimism, even when logic says otherwise. "If you don't give up," he once said, "you still have a chance. Giving up is the greatest failure." One of Jack's most famous lessons is about failure itself. He believes failure is not the opposite of success. It is the foundation of it. Throughout his youth, he failed exams, job interviews, and business ideas. But each failure became a teacher. He told young people, "Today is cruel, tomorrow is crueler. But the day after tomorrow is beautiful. Most people die tomorrow night." His words remind us that resilience is not a skill, it's a mindset, In a world obsessed with speed, Jack teaches the power of patience. He believes success built too fast often fades just as quickly. When Alibaba struggled in its early years, investors doubted him and competitors mocked him, but Jack remained calm. Rome was not built in a day, he said, and Alibaba will not be either. He taught his team to focus on trust, not numbers, on service, not size. That slow foundation is what made the company strong enough to last decades. Another of Jack's philosophies is rooted in vision over resources. When he began, he had no money, no connections, and no technology background. But he had a vision, a belief that the internet could give small businesses a voice. He once told students, "If you have a dream, protect it. When you have nothing, that's the best time to dream." He wanted them to understand that imagination is the greatest form of wealth. Jack's approach to leadership also offers timeless wisdom. In a world where CEOs often lead with authority, Jack led with empathy. He believed that great leaders don't command, they inspire. He compared leadership to being the head goose in a flying formation. The leader flies in front, breaks the wind, and helps others follow. To him, leadership was about service, not status. That is why employees saw him not as a boss, but as a teacher walking beside them. He often told young entrepreneurs to focus on people first. His customers first, employees second, shareholders third. Philosophy became a cornerstone of Alibaba's culture. He explained that if customers are happy, business will thrive. If employees are cared for, innovation will flourish. But if you only chase shareholder approval, you lose the soul of your company. Money follows value, he said, not the other way around. His humility also defined his character. Even as one of the world's richest men, Jack never saw himself as a success story. "I'm just a normal guy," he often said. "I failed many times. I just never quit." To him, the purpose of success was not to celebrate yourself, but to lift others up. He reminded his employees and followers that true greatness lies in helping others succeed. Jack's teachings about education are among his most heartfelt. He believes education should not focus only on knowledge, but on imagination and kindness. "Knowledge will make you smart," he said, "but wisdom will make you human." In his view, schools must teach students how to dream, communicate, and collaborate, not just how to memorize. He often urged parents not to pressure children to become number one, but to help them become unique. Another cornerstone of his philosophy is optimism about the future. Even in difficult times, Jack remains hopeful about humanity. He believes the world moves forward when people cooperate rather than compete. The next generation must learn to work together between nations, between cultures, between humans and technology, he said. If we fear the future, we lose it. If we embrace it, we shape it. His optimism isn't blind, it's disciplined, built on faith in people. Jack often speaks about balance between work and life, ambition and peace. In his younger years, he worked tirelessly, often sleeping in his office. But as he grew older, he realized that burnout steals creativity. He began telling entrepreneurs, "Work hard, but don't forget to live. If you lose your health, your dream will stop too." That realization came not from textbooks, but from experience, the wisdom earned through exhaustion. He also emphasizes emotional intelligence as the future of success. "Machines are smart, but they have no heart," he says. "Humans must focus on EQ, the ability to care, to inspire, and to forgive." He believes that in the age of AI, the most valuable skill will be empathy. His message to young leaders is simple. The world doesn't need more geniuses. It needs more people who understand others. Another profound idea Jack shares is the difference between small thinking and big vision. He tells entrepreneurs that thinking small keeps them safe, but it also keeps them ordinary. "Don't start a company to be rich," he says. "Start it to solve a problem." For Jack, entrepreneurship is an act of service. Money is just a result, it's never the purpose. That is why, even at the height of his power, he reminded his team to forget the money, remember the mission. Jack's philosophy on happiness also surprises many. Despite his fame, he admits that being rich doesn't guarantee peace. When I had nothing, he said, I slept well. When I became successful, I lost sleep. That honesty reveals his humanity. To him, happiness comes not from owning, but from creating, from seeing others smile because of what you built. His calm smile hides years of struggle, but it shines with acceptance. He also teaches that kindness is strategy, not weakness. In a world of competition, kindness creates trust. In business, it builds loyalty. In life, it opens doors. Jack often said, if you want to be respected, respect others first. That belief turned Alibaba's culture into one where collaboration mattered more than hierarchy. His kindness wasn't soft. It was powerful, the kind that leads through example. Jack's spiritual view of leadership often surprises business audiences. He believes that success has a rhythm, a natural flow between effort and surrender. You can control your effort, he said, but not your destiny. Sometimes you must let things unfold. He compares it to Tai Chi, where softness overcomes strength. This philosophy taught him patience and balance during the hardest moments of his journey. For Jack, the ultimate goal of leadership is to inspire others to lead. He once said, a great leader creates more leaders, not followers. That's why he stepped away from Alibaba, not because he was tired, but because he wanted others to take the torch. He knew that real legacy isn't about how long you lead, but how well your leadership lasts after you're gone. To the next generation, Jack offers a simple but powerful message. Dream big, stay humble, and keep learning. He believes the world will belong to those who combine imagination with integrity. The world doesn't need another Jack Ma, he said. It needs thousands of young people better than Jack Ma. He sees every new entrepreneur as a continuation of the dream he once began. Even in retirement, his philosophy continues to echo through speeches, interviews, and classrooms. Students study his ideas, startups quote his words, and teachers use his story to remind their students that failure is not the end. His life has become a mirror reflecting possibility, that one person, no matter how ordinary, can touch the lives of millions by believing deeply in their purpose. Jack's teachings also remind us to redefine what success means. In a culture obsessed with results, he challenges people to measure success by impact, not income. If people remember you for kindness, he said, you are successful. If they forget your name, but keep your influence, you are great. That simple wisdom carries the depth of a lifetime. As he grows older, Jack's focus continues to shift from business to humanity. He envisions a future where technology, education, and compassion merge to create a better world. We can't predict the next 100 years, he said, but we can decide what kind of people we want to be. It is that decision of kindness, courage, and creativity that he believes will shape the next century. In the quiet of reflection, Jack's story comes full circle. From a small boy guiding tourists around Hangzhou to a teacher inspiring millions across the world, his journey reminds us that greatness begins with curiosity, that failure can be a friend, that dreaming boldly, even foolishly, can change everything. Today, as new generations listen to his story, they hear not just the tale of a billionaire, but the voice of a teacher still guiding them from afar. His lessons are not about wealth or technology, they're about humanity, courage, and belief. He showed that the most powerful empire is not built with bricks or code, but with faith in people. And so Jack Ma's philosophy endures, a quiet legacy whispered to every dreamer who dares to start small, think differently, and never stop believing. For in every failure lies a seed of strength, and in every dream lies the power to change the world. By 2020, Jack Ma stood at the very summit of global influence. He had built Alibaba into one of the most valuable companies on earth, transformed China's e-commerce landscape, and became a symbol of modern entrepreneurship. But as his power and voice grew louder, so did the attention from those who preferred silence. The stage that once celebrated him would soon become the place of his greatest trial. It began with a speech. On October 24, 2020, Jack Ma spoke at the Bund Summit in Shanghai, a high-profile financial conference. Standing before China's most powerful bankers and regulators, he criticized the outdated financial system that he believed was stifling innovation. His words were bold, almost rebellious. "We cannot use yesterday's tools to manage the future," he said. Those few sentences changed the course of his life. Within weeks, the Chinese government began tightening its grip on the financial technology industry. Jack's company, Ant Group, was set to launch the world's largest IPO, valued at over $34 billion. It would have made history. But suddenly, regulators halted it just days before its debut. The message was clear. The government was asserting control, and Jack Ma had gone too far. For years, Jack had been a national hero. He was the cheerful face of Chinese innovation, often meeting with world leaders and inspiring young dreamers. But in a system where power is centralized, even heroes must tread carefully. His criticism was seen not as advice, but as defiance. And just like that, the teacher who once preached about courage was now learning a harsh lesson about silence. After the speech, Jack vanished from public view. No interviews, no appearances, no social media posts. Rumors spread quickly. Some said he had been detained. Others said he was under surveillance. For months, the man who had once been everywhere was suddenly nowhere. The world waited and speculated, wondering how a figure so large could disappear so completely. Behind the scenes, Alibaba faced intense scrutiny. Regulators launched antitrust investigations, accusing the company of monopolistic practices. Fines followed, record-breaking amounts that signaled the government's determination to rein in big tech. The empire Jack built began to tremble, not from competition, but from political pressure. Yet even in absence, his presence was felt. Employees whispered his quotes, entrepreneurs repeated his lessons, and his silence became louder than his speeches. To understand this moment, one must understand the system Jack lived in. In China, the line between innovation and control is delicate. For years, Jack walked that line with grace, praising the government while pushing the boundaries of freedom in business. But when he questioned the system itself, the balance tipped. His disappearance became a symbol, a warning and a mystery all at once. Many outside China saw it as tragedy, a hero silenced by his own country. But to those who understood Jack's philosophy, it was another chapter in his journey of transformation. He had always taught that failure and setbacks were life's best teachers, and now fate was testing him again, on a scale he had never imagined. Months passed before Jack resurfaced. In early 2021, a video appeared online of him speaking to teachers in a charity event. He looked thinner, quieter, but peaceful. "We will meet again after this storm," he said softly. It was a short message, but it reassured millions. He was alive, and perhaps wiser than ever. This period of disappearance changed him deeply. Gone was the global celebrity who joked on stage and sang at company events. In his place stood a man of reflection. He began traveling quietly, often visiting agricultural projects and education programs. He shifted his focus away from tech and toward humanity, farming, sustainability, and teaching. It was as if the teacher had returned to his first classroom. In 2022, Jack Ma spent much of his time overseas in Japan, Europe, and Southeast Asia. He studied agricultural technology, spoke with farmers, and lived a simple life. Observers were puzzled. How could one of the world's richest men find peace in studying fish farming and food sustainability? But to those who understood his story, it made sense. He was returning to simplicity, to curiosity, to the roots of learning. His absence from the corporate world marked the end of an era, not just for Alibaba, but for China's entrepreneurial spirit. Many founders grew cautious, innovation slowed. The dream that Jack once ignited seemed dimmer. Yet even in silence, his legacy continued to inspire those who still believed in the power of ideas. His disappearance became not a fall, but a moment of rebirth. Jack once said, "When life is too smooth, you must be careful." Those words became prophetic. His fall from the public eye reminded the world that power and freedom often walk different paths. Yet it also reminded us that true strength is not in staying on stage. It's in knowing when to step off and rediscover your purpose. The world watched closely when Jack returned to China in 2023. He visited schools, met teachers, and spoke about education reform. His tone was calm, humble, almost meditative. He no longer spoke of conquering markets, but of nurturing minds. "I have learned," he said, "that education is the future of every nation, and the future belongs to those who can dream with kindness." It was clear that Jack Ma had evolved. The once fiery entrepreneur had become a philosopher. He no longer wanted to be the richest man in China. He wanted to be the wisest teacher. The experience of losing control of his empire had stripped away his ego and left only purpose. What began as a fall had turned into a quiet transformation. Behind this transformation lay a truth about power. The higher one rises, the thinner the air becomes. Visibility turns to vulnerability. Influence becomes a burden. Jack's journey through disappearance taught him, and the world, that survival in such a system requires not only intelligence, but humility. He had faced not just external pressure, but the test of identity itself. For those who admired him, his silence became a lesson in restraint. In an age where everyone wants to speak louder, Jack chose to listen. He had once built an empire of noise, online marketplaces, digital payments, endless transactions, but now he seemed to seek meaning in stillness. Perhaps in silence, he found what success could never give him: peace. Some say his story mirrors ancient Chinese philosophy that the wise man bends like bamboo in the storm, never breaking, only swaying. Jack's fall was not an end, but a bending moment, teaching modern entrepreneurs that flexibility is not weakness. It is wisdom. To endure, one must yield. To lead, one must sometimes disappear. In his later interviews, Jack avoided political topics completely. He spoke instead of youth, education, and global cooperation. "The world is full of problems," he said, "but if we teach young people to love and create, there will always be hope." His words carried the quiet strength of a man who had walked through fire and returned as light. The world of technology continued to move on without him. New CEOs emerged, new platforms rose, and the spotlight shifted. Yet Jack's influence never truly left. His story remained a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the brightest stars must respect the gravity around them. But it was also a story of rebirth, of how a man could lose everything the world values and still keep his soul intact. By 2025, Jack Ma lived almost like a monk. No interviews, no conferences, no headlines. He was rarely seen, but his projects in education and agriculture grew quietly across Asia. To many, he had become a myth, a symbol of humility after greatness, of wisdom after chaos, and perhaps that was how he wanted it. He had once told his employees, "A great life is not about how much you own, but about what you give back." Now his life embodied that truth. He gave back not through money, but through presence, teaching, mentoring, listening. He had traded applause for peace, and in doing so, found a deeper kind of success. In the end, Jack Ma's disappearance became one of the most profound chapters of his legend. It showed that the measure of a man is not how he stands in light, but how he grows in darkness. When the world stopped listening to him, he listened to himself. And from that silence, a new purpose emerged. His story teaches us that even in the face of power, humility remains the greatest strength. That success can be taken, but wisdom cannot. And that sometimes the greatest victory is not to fight the storm, but to become calm within it. And so, the teacher who once built a digital empire returned to his true calling, not to rule, but to inspire. His voice, once silenced, became softer, wiser, and infinitely more powerful. For in the end, Jack Ma's greatest creation was not Alibaba. It was the belief that no matter how dark the night becomes, a teacher's light, the light of knowledge, kindness, and resilience, will always find its way back to the dawn. Time has a way of softening even the loudest echoes. Years after Jack Ma stepped out of the spotlight, his influence continues to ripple quietly across the world. Though his voice is rarely heard, his ideas live on. In classrooms, in startups, in the hearts of dreamers who believe that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. His legacy is not just in the companies he built, but in the way he changed how the world thinks about business, leadership, and purpose. To understand his impact, one must first remember where it began. Jack was never meant to be a businessman in the traditional sense. He was a teacher, a storyteller who used business as his classroom. Through Alibaba, he taught millions that technology could empower the smallest of voices. He once said, "The internet is an opportunity for the small guys. It gives power to those who never had it." That belief became the foundation of modern e-commerce in Asia and beyond. Alibaba was more than a company. It was a movement. It showed that innovation doesn't have to come from Silicon Valley. It can come from anywhere there is courage and imagination. In the 1990s, China was still emerging from isolation, uncertain about capitalism and technology. Jack's vision bridged those worlds, combining Chinese resilience with global ambition. He helped create a new identity for Chinese entrepreneurship, bold, creative, and human. Even after he stepped away, Alibaba's culture carried his spirit. Every year, new recruits watched videos of his old speeches, his jokes, his metaphors, his endless optimism. Inside the company, his philosophies became unwritten laws. Serve first, profit second, fail fast, learn faster, and never complain, always adapt. These simple lines became the DNA of thousands of startups across Asia. But Jack's true global legacy is not measured in profits. It's measured in mindset. He showed developing nations that they didn't need to copy the West to innovate. They could find success by solving their own problems, using their own values. In Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America, young entrepreneurs studied his journey and saw a reflection of their own struggles. To them, Jack Ma wasn't just a Chinese billionaire, he was proof that humility and persistence could transcend borders. Through the Jack Ma Foundation, he began channeling his energy into education, environmental sustainability, and entrepreneurship in underserved regions. The foundation launched programs to support teachers, rural students, and small business owners. His vision for philanthropy was not charity, it was empowerment. "Don't give people fish," he said. "Teach them how to fish, and teach them to believe they can own the river." One of his most influential projects was the Africa's Business Heroes competition, which he founded to identify and fund visionary entrepreneurs across the continent. He wanted to spark the same spirit that once fueled him, the belief that ideas could change lives. When asked why he focused on Africa, he replied, "Because I see China 20 years ago in them, hungry, hopeful, and fearless." That single sentence captured the essence of his philosophy. Hope as a renewable resource. In education, his ideas reached even further. Jack often said, "The future of education is about values, not knowledge." He believed that the world needed more creators, not test takers. His foundation funded innovation in teaching methods, encouraging schools to nurture creativity and emotional intelligence. To him, education was not preparation for life. It was life itself, a lifelong journey of curiosity. Jack's speeches at global forums continued to shape how leaders viewed business ethics. While others spoke of profits and expansion, he spoke of compassion and sustainability. "If we only chase money, we will all be poor," he said. "But if we chase dreams that serve others, wealth will follow." This idea began influencing corporate cultures, inspiring CEOs to measure success through impact, not numbers. His legacy also transformed digital economies. The infrastructure Alibaba built, from online marketplaces to cloud computing, became the backbone of millions of small businesses. Farmers sold directly to consumers, students learned from home, and artisans reached global markets. What began as a simple dream in Hangzhou became an ecosystem that lifted an entire generation out of poverty. That is not just a business story. It's human evolution through connection. Jack's vision of the digital future also influenced global leaders and policymakers. He urged governments to support small businesses and balance regulation with innovation. Regulation should be like traffic lights, he said, not to stop cars, but to make sure they move safely. His words echoed in boardrooms and conferences, reminding policymakers that progress must be guided by wisdom, not fear. Even his mistakes became lessons for others. The crackdown on his empire in 2020 reminded entrepreneurs around the world that power without humility can invite resistance. Yet how he handled it, with silence, reflection, and grace, became a case study in resilience. Business schools began teaching the Jack Ma paradox, how a man who lost everything in power still won in purpose. His global influence wasn't limited to economics. He changed the way people saw China itself. Before Alibaba, few associated China with innovation or creativity. Jack became the first global Chinese icon who wasn't a politician, athlete, or artist, but a dreamer who built something from nothing. He humanized Chinese entrepreneurship, showing that success could be achieved through humor, humility, and vision. In many ways, Jack became a bridge between East and West. He could sit comfortably in a Beijing boardroom or a Silicon Valley summit and speak both languages, not just linguistically, but philosophically. He believed that the world's future depended on cooperation, not confrontation. "The 21st century is not about who wins," he said. "It's about how we work together to make everyone win." That idea remains a compass for global leaders navigating a divided world. Yet, beyond all his influence and achievements, perhaps Jack's greatest legacy is his humanity. He never pretended to be perfect. He shared his failures openly, laughed at his mistakes, and reminded others that weakness can coexist with strength. In doing so, he made success feel accessible. Millions who once doubted themselves began to believe if he could do it, so could they. His journey also challenged the idea of what it means to be a teacher. For Jack, teaching didn't end in the classroom. It expanded to every part of life. Whether leading a company, mentoring youth, or helping farmers, he remained the same curious soul who once practiced English with tourists in Hangzhou. "I am still a teacher," he said. "I just have more students now." In recent years, his quiet lifestyle became a symbol of maturity, the final stage of a visionary's evolution. Like many great thinkers before him, Jack withdrew from noise to observe life more deeply. Friends who visit him describe a man at peace, reading, walking, tending to nature, and mentoring in small circles. The fire that once drove him to conquer the world now burns gently, illuminating others. When asked in a rare interview what success means to him now, he smiled and said, Success is when people no longer need you, but remember what you taught them. That sentence captures the essence of his legacy. He didn't want followers, he wanted thinkers. He didn't build Alibaba to be eternal. He built it to inspire others to build their own Alibabas. The world continues to evolve, but traces of Jack Ma's influence remain everywhere. Every small business that dares to sell online, every teacher who encourages creativity, every entrepreneur who faces failure with a smile, all carry a piece of his spirit. His story has become a quiet undercurrent beneath the surface of global progress. Even as artificial intelligence and automation reshape industries, Jack's teachings remain relevant. He often said that in the future, machines will surpass humans in knowledge, but never in wisdom. The future belongs to the heart, he said. The ability to care, to dream, to love, that is what will make humans great. Those words, once poetic, now feel prophetic. In the vast landscape of modern history, Jack Ma stands not as a tycoon, but as a timeless symbol of possibility. His story began with rejection and ended with reflection, a full circle from ambition to wisdom. He taught that success is not a destination, but a continuous act of becoming, that the true mark of greatness is not applause, but legacy. As we look at the world he helped shape, digital, interconnected, and full of dreamers, we see the fingerprints of his vision everywhere. Not in monuments or statues, but in the quiet confidence of people who dare to believe in themselves. His legacy is alive in every person who chooses curiosity over fear, resilience over despair, and kindness over competition. And so the story of Jack Ma concludes not with an ending, but with a beginning. His voice may be quieter now, but his message echoes louder than ever, that greatness starts small, that failure is a friend, and that the purpose of success is to lift others higher. He once said, "Your life is your greatest story. Make it worth telling." And through his life he showed us exactly how. There comes a moment in every great story when the hero fades from the spotlight and the lesson begins to shine on its own. For Jack Ma, that moment arrived quietly. The world no longer watched his every move, yet his ideas continued to ripple across continents, shaping how people thought about technology, work, and meaning. The man who once stood for relentless ambition had transformed into a symbol of reflection, of balance between progress and peace. After decades of chasing the future, Jack began to live differently. He started speaking less about business and more about life. When he met with young entrepreneurs, he didn't talk about profits or scale. He talked about purpose. He told them that the future would not belong to the richest, but to the kindest. The next generation of leaders, he said softly, must learn how to be good humans before they try to be great CEOs. Those words, once unthinkable in boardrooms, began to sound like prophecy. The world he helped build was changing rapidly. Artificial intelligence, automation, and digital platforms were now rewriting the rules of human life. And as machines became smarter, humans grew anxious. People began asking questions that once seemed distant. What happens when technology replaces us? What is the meaning of work, of learning, of human connection in a digital world? Jack believed these were not technological questions, but moral ones. He reminded people that innovation without empathy could destroy more than it creates. Technology must serve people, he said. If it doesn't make humanity kinder, it's not progress. His view stood out in an era where speed often overshadowed wisdom. He wanted the world to slow down and ask, what kind of future are we building, and for whom? As he withdrew from corporate leadership, he spent more time studying nature, teaching, and connecting with people outside the tech world. Those close to him said he found peace in simplicity, farming, reading, even quiet meditation. For a man once defined by noise, silence became his greatest teacher. He would later describe those years as his second education, of the time he learned how to live without needing to win. Jack began to share his philosophy of the new human era. He said the 20th century was about competition, but the 21st century must be about cooperation. In his view, the next great revolution wouldn't be industrial or digital. It would be emotional. "We have mastered the power of machines," he said, "but not yet the art of being human." That sentence carried the weight of wisdom born from experience, from someone who had seen both the beauty and the burden of success. He began visiting universities again, not as a guest of honor, but as a quiet mentor. Students expected lectures on entrepreneurship, but he often surprised them with discussions about philosophy, art, and humility. He told them that imagination mattered more than knowledge, because imagination leads to empathy. "Machines can think faster than us," he said, "but they can't dream better than us." His words resonated deeply in a world losing touch with meaning. Many young people who once idolized wealth now began searching for balance. Jack's life became a reflection of that journey, from striving to being, from ambition to awareness. He often said, "The greatest success is finding peace in yourself, even when the world is loud." Outside China, his story continued to inspire leaders who sought to blend innovation with compassion. In conferences across Europe and Asia, people still quoted his metaphors. "Today is cruel, tomorrow is crueler, but the day after tomorrow is beautiful." To them, Jack represented not just success, but endurance, the ability to stand tall through uncertainty and emerge wiser. In 2026, Jack announced a new initiative that surprised many, a global Earth Learning Network, combining technology, agriculture, and education. The idea was simple, yet profound. Reconnect humanity to the planet that sustains it. He believed the future of business was not in selling more, but in sustaining more. "If we can't take care of the earth," he said, "we don't deserve the profits it gives us." His foundation began investing in sustainable farming, renewable energy, and digital tools for environmental education. For him, it was a full circle. As a child, he had guided tourists through Hangzhou's gardens, learning English from the natural world around him. Decades later, he was guiding the world back to that same wisdom, that growth must be harmonious, not harmful. The boy who once chased dreams through broken streets now urged the world to pause and protect its soil. But Jack's message was never just about the planet. It was about people. He saw that loneliness, burnout, and anxiety were becoming global epidemics. The same technology that connected billions also left many feeling more isolated than ever. Jack believed this was the next great challenge of civilization, to build connection, not just communication. "We are talking more than ever," he said, "but listening less than ever." In interviews, he began to reflect more on spirituality than business. "When I was young, I wanted to change the world," he said. "Now I want to understand it." He admitted that wealth had given him everything except certainty. What mattered most, he realized, was the peace that comes from gratitude. He often told audiences, "You will never be truly rich until you are rich in gratitude." Jack's transformation also sparked debate among scholars and thinkers. Some saw it as a retreat, others called it evolution. But those who followed his life closely knew it was neither. It was the natural rhythm of growth, the moment when a teacher realizes that his greatest lesson is to live by example. His quietness became a message in itself, that wisdom doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply breathes. Around this time, documentaries and biographies about Jack's life began to appear across platforms. Yet, even as the world analyzed his story, he seemed unconcerned with his legacy. "History will forget me one day," he said calmly, "and that's good, because what I want to last is not my name, but the hope that anyone, anywhere, can dream big and stay kind." That humility became the essence of his legend. It reminded people that greatness is not about permanence, but about presence, the impact you leave in the moment you're given. Through his story, millions began to rediscover the beauty of starting small, dreaming big, and accepting change with grace. As the global economy shifted again in the late 2020s, Jack's teachings found new relevance. The rise of automation threatened jobs, and people feared being replaced by machines. Yet Jack's words offered comfort. Machines will replace work, he said, but they can never replace meaning. He encouraged societies to build systems that prioritize creativity, empathy, and cooperation, the qualities that make humans irreplaceable. He envisioned a future where people worked less but lived more, where time was spent learning, exploring, and helping others. In the future, he said, the richest people will be those who have time, not money. That idea resonated deeply in a generation tired of endless hustle and craving human connection. By the early 2030s, Jack Ma had become something unexpected, not just a businessman, but a philosopher of the digital age. His ideas were studied in universities alongside thinkers like Drucker, Confucius, and even the Dalai Lama. Scholars called his philosophy compassionate capitalism, the belief that business can grow and give at the same time. He had turned capitalism from a race into a reflection. In one of his final public lectures, he summarized his life in a single sentence. I started with nothing, I gained everything, and now I am learning to be nothing again. The audience sat in silence, realizing they were hearing not just the words of an entrepreneur, but the wisdom of a man who had transcended ambition. For the youth of the next generation, Jack Ma's story became a reminder that success without soul is emptiness. His life taught them that progress must walk hand in hand with compassion, that knowledge without humility leads to chaos, and that leadership begins where ego ends. Even after his time, his philosophy continues to echo in boardrooms, classrooms, and quiet hearts across the world. The teacher who once built an empire left behind something far more powerful, a blueprint for how to live in harmony with technology, nature, and one another. Jack Ma's story was never about money or fame. It was about transformation, of self, of society, of spirit. He began as a dreamer, became a builder, and ended as a sage. In his journey, we find the map of our own, a reminder that in the race to change the world, we must not forget to understand it. And so, as the lights of his public life dim, his message shines even brighter. That true success is not found in how high you climb, but in how deeply you understand why you climbed at all. Jack Ma's story may have started in Hangzhou, but its echo belongs to the world. It belongs to anyone who dares to dream, to fail, to rise, and to evolve. For in every ending he found a beginning, and in every silence he found truth. And perhaps that is the final lesson of Jack Ma, that greatness is not about becoming more, but becoming whole. When Jack Ma vanished from the public eye in 2020, the world fell silent. For a man whose voice once echoed across nations, his sudden quietness felt unnatural, almost haunting. Rumors began to swirl of censorship, exile, or even worse. But behind the mystery, something deeper was unfolding, something far more human than political. It was not the story of a man silenced, but of a man learning to listen. For years, Jack had stood on the world stage, his words shaping the dreams of millions. Yet the same fame that lifted him also chained him. The pressure, the scrutiny, the endless expectations, they had become a weight even his bright spirit could no longer carry. In those days of disappearance, when the world demanded answers, Jack found something else instead: solitude. It was the first time in decades that he could hear his own thoughts again. The truth is, silence has a way of revealing what noise hides. Away from cameras and crowds, Jack began to see his life not as a sequence of achievements, but as a story of transformation. He realized that success, for all its glory, had stolen something precious, the freedom to simply be. The man who once taught millions about courage was now learning the hardest lesson of all, the art of letting go. During that quiet period, Jack retreated into nature. He traveled to remote areas, meeting farmers, teachers, and children, people who lived without the chaos of global ambition. There, he rediscovered simplicity. He watched how the seasons moved without hurry, how the earth gave without pride. In the rhythm of the natural world, he saw a reflection of what humanity had forgotten. That growth must have rest, that ambition must have humility, and that silence is not absence, but presence in its purest form. When he finally reappeared months later, the man who had once commanded attention now seemed softer, almost invisible. His voice was gentler, his words fewer, his smile quieter. He no longer spoke like a CEO, but like a teacher again, the kind who guides without demanding, who leads by asking, not telling. The world noticed, but few understood. They were looking for the old Jack Ma, the warrior of capitalism. But what stood before them was something else entirely. A man who had turned inward and returned wiser. In interviews after his reemergence, Jack rarely addressed the disappearance directly. Instead, he spoke about the importance of balance. When a person becomes too visible, he said, they stop seeing. He warned of the danger of constant exposure, not just for leaders, but for society as a whole. We are all becoming performers, he said, but who are we when the stage lights go off? It was a question few dared to ask, and even fewer could answer. Jack's absence became a metaphor for the modern world, a world drowning in noise, desperate for silence. People began to see his withdrawal not as weakness, but as wisdom. In a time obsessed with visibility, he had chosen invisibility. In a world chasing relevance, he sought reflection. It was perhaps his most radical act to step away at the height of power and rediscover what it means to be human. Philosophers and scholars began to study his retreat as a cultural moment. They called it the return of the self, an echo of ancient Eastern teachings about balance and impermanence. Like Lao Tzu or the quiet sages of old, Jack had shown that true strength often hides behind stillness. He embodied an ancient truth in a digital age, that the loudest voice is not always the most powerful, and that wisdom often whispers. Behind closed doors, Jack devoted himself to education once more. But this time, it wasn't about business schools or entrepreneurship programs. It was about teaching children how to think freely, how to love learning, and how to stay human in an algorithmic world. He believed the next generation needed not more coders, but more creators, minds that could see beauty as easily as data. His foundation began building schools that blended science with art, reason with wonder. In one of his rare speeches after returning, he shared a story about a farmer he had met during his quiet years. The farmer told him, "If you plant too many seeds in one field, nothing grows well." Jack smiled as he repeated the line to his audience. "That," he said, "is the mistake of our time. We plant too many dreams too fast in the same soil, and then we wonder why nothing feels alive." The hall fell silent, and in that silence, something profound was understood. People began to realize that Jack's disappearance had been less about politics and more about perspective. It was the natural evolution of a man who had achieved everything and then asked himself, "What now?" In his silence, he had found a truth that every civilization must rediscover. That progress without pause leads to emptiness, that speed without direction leads to collapse. Over time, the myth of his disappearance became part of his legend. But those who looked closely saw that it wasn't disappearance, it was rebirth. He had shed the identity of the billionaire, the founder, the celebrity, and returned to his simplest form, a teacher who wanted to help the world learn again. It was the same Jack Ma who once stood in front of a blackboard in Hangzhou, teaching English with nothing but hope and a smile. Only now his classroom was the entire world. His return also carried a quiet message to leaders everywhere, that stepping back is not failure. In fact, sometimes it is the only way forward. He reminded people that reflection is not retreat, and that silence can be more transformative than speech. For many entrepreneurs, burned out by endless competition, his example became a lifeline, a reminder that peace is not the opposite of success, but its highest form. As the years passed, the mystery around his disappearance faded, but the lesson remained. Scholars began to call it the silence of Jack Ma, a metaphor for rediscovery, for turning inward in an outward world. In universities and business schools, case studies no longer focused on how he built Alibaba, but on how he rebuilt himself. The man who once disrupted commerce was now disrupting the idea of success itself. By the time he reached his late 60s, Jack spoke rarely in public, but when he did, his words carried a different kind of weight, the kind that comes from a soul that has seen both the peak and the valley. In one of his final addresses, he said, "When I was young, I wanted the world to hear me. Now, I just want to listen to it." That line became one of his most quoted. It captured everything: his ambition, his humility, his peace. The world may never fully know what happened during those silent months, but perhaps it doesn't need to, because the mystery itself became part of the message. It reminded us that not every story must be explained, not every journey must be visible. Some truths live quietly in the space between words, in the stillness between achievements. And that is the hidden legacy of Jack Ma, not the billions he earned, nor the empire he built, but the silence he taught us to respect. In his disappearance, he gave the world something far greater than innovation. He gave us permission to pause, to breathe, to remember that even in a world obsessed with progress, there is wisdom in stillness. Jack Ma's story, at its core, is not about triumph or tragedy. It's about balance, between sound and silence, between ambition and acceptance, between the outer journey of success and the inner journey of peace. And perhaps in that balance lies the future of humanity itself. Because the world doesn't just need another billionaire, it needs another teacher. When the noise of an era fades, what remains is not its applause, but its wisdom. For Jack Ma, the silence he chose became the most powerful statement of his life. In a world addicted to constant motion, he proved that stepping back could be an act of leadership, and as time passed, his absence began to teach the world lessons his presence never could. Long after he left the stage, people continued to speak his name. But now they spoke it differently, not with awe but with understanding. The world no longer saw him as the loud billionaire who built an empire from nothing. They saw him as something gentler, almost timeless, a man who showed that humanity could coexist with ambition, that success could breathe with humility. His legacy was not in his wealth, but in his wisdom. In classrooms and companies alike, a new phrase began to appear, the Jack Ma mindset. It was used not to describe business tactics, but a way of seeing life. It meant daring to dream, daring to fail, and daring to stop when success demanded more than peace could give. It was a mindset of balance, one that understood that the heart must lead the hands and that kindness is not weakness, but power refined. Business schools began revisiting his speeches, not for case studies in commerce, but for philosophy. Professors quoted him beside ancient thinkers, noting how his words bridged the gap between old Chinese wisdom and modern capitalism. "Don't fight for success," he once said, "flow toward it." In a time defined by competition, that sounded almost revolutionary. Yet in its calmness lay its truth, that strength is not in resistance, but in understanding. Around the world, young entrepreneurs began building companies inspired by his teachings, not to dominate markets, but to heal them. Startups in Africa, India, and Southeast Asia adopted his principle of inclusive innovation, focusing on technology that empowers rather than replaces. Many of them called Jack Ma their silent mentor. Even though he was no longer on stage, his voice echoed through their missions. In Hangzhou, where his journey began, a new generation of dreamers walked the same streets he once did. But now the city was not just a monument to Alibaba's success. It had become a living classroom. Museums, libraries, and institutes carried his ideas forward. One inscription on a marble wall near West Lake read simply, "Kindness is the highest technology." It became a local proverb whispered among students who studied under the shade of trees he helped plant. Jack's legacy also changed how leaders viewed failure. In a world where mistakes were often punished, he made them sacred. He called failure the tuition fee of life. He taught that without mistakes there could be no innovation, no character, no compassion. His openness about his struggles, being rejected from jobs, facing criticism, losing control, became a blueprint for emotional resilience in business. To him, vulnerability was not a flaw, it was the root of human connection. As technology accelerated, his words became even more relevant. Artificial intelligence and automation continued to shape industries, but Jack's teachings reminded people of their role as guardians of meaning. "Let machines have intelligence," he said, "but let humans keep wisdom." In that simple sentence, he defined the central challenge of the 21st century, to stay human in an age of machines. By the 2030s, his name appeared in textbooks not under entrepreneurs, but under modern thinkers. His story was taught alongside the great reformers who changed how humanity viewed progress. He was no longer just the founder of Alibaba. He had become the philosopher of purpose. Scholars described him as a bridge, connecting East and West, technology and spirit, ambition and grace. The schools and foundations he established began producing leaders with a new kind of ambition. These were not the ruthless CEOs of the past. They were caretakers, people who built companies like ecosystems designed to nurture both people and the planet. Many of them referred to Jack Ma's later speeches as their awakening. His idea that success is only beautiful when shared became a mantra in boardrooms around the world. But Jack's influence wasn't confined to economics. It extended quietly into culture, art, and even spirituality. Filmmakers created documentaries exploring his transformation from tycoon to teacher. Artists painted him as a symbol of humility in an age of excess. In music and poetry, his words became metaphors, a call to find peace in progress and purpose in power. Through all this, Jack himself remained distant from the spotlight. He refused interviews, declined awards, and lived quietly by the sea. Locals sometimes saw him walking alone at dawn, smiling at the sunrise. To them, he seemed at peace, a man who had given his message to the world and no longer needed to speak. "I've said enough," he once told a journalist. "Now it's time for others to write the next chapter." His legacy continued to evolve without him. When young entrepreneurs faced uncertainty, they often recalled his calm optimism. "Today is hard," he had said. "Tomorrow will be worse, but the day after tomorrow will be beautiful." It became more than a quote. It became a belief system, a quiet faith in resilience. And as crises came and went, his words guided people through. Governments, too, began to adopt elements of his philosophy. In parts of Asia and Africa, policymakers began exploring human-centered innovation, the very concept Jack had championed years earlier. His name appeared in global sustainability reports, his ideas woven into discussions about ethics and artificial intelligence. What had once been seen as the thoughts of a businessman were now the foundations of a new kind of civilization, one built on compassion as much as intelligence. In his later years, Jack rarely appeared in public, but when he did, he radiated serenity. Those who met him described him as light-hearted, even playful, as though he had finally returned to the teacher he always was. He often laughed about his fame, saying, "The best thing about being forgotten is freedom." For him, that was the ultimate success, not being remembered, but being understood. And so, the story of Jack Ma's life came full circle. The boy who once guided tourists by bicycle had guided the entire world toward a new kind of wealth, one measured not in currency, but in consciousness. The teacher who became a billionaire had in the end become a teacher again. His empire of commerce had evolved into an empire of thought. When people look back on his era, they will see more than a man who built a company. They will see a man who built a new language for success, one that values empathy as much as efficiency, kindness as much as courage, and peace as much as progress. Because Jack Ma's true legacy is not written in numbers or stock prices. It lives in the minds he inspired, the hearts he awakened, and the silence he left behind. He proved that greatness is not about how much the world hears you, but how deeply it remembers your lessons. And as the world continues to chase the next big thing, somewhere in the quiet heart of Hangzhou, the spirit of a humble teacher still whispers, "Dream boldly, live kindly, and when the world grows loud, remember the strength of silence." When a great teacher finishes speaking, their voice doesn't disappear. It transforms. It becomes a ripple, carried forward by those who listened deeply enough to understand. Jack Ma's disappearance and quiet return marked the end of one chapter in history, but the beginning of another in consciousness. His story was no longer his alone. It had become a living lesson shared by millions across generations. In the years after he stepped away, the world began to move through the very ideas he once spoke about. Compassion became a core value in business. Emotional intelligence was no longer seen as weakness, but as the highest form of strength. Leaders who once measured success by numbers began measuring it by meaning. Without forcing it, Jack's philosophy had quietly reshaped what it meant to win. Universities around the world began adding his speeches to their philosophy and ethics courses. Students didn't study him as a CEO, but as a thinker, a man who bridged ancient wisdom and modern ambition. His words, "Don't compete for money, compete for meaning," became a quiet anthem for a generation tired of endless hustle. For the first time, the world was starting to believe that gentleness could change history just as power once did. In China, his hometown of Hangzhou turned into a global center of ethical innovation. Scholars called it the city of the future heart. Young entrepreneurs gathered not to pitch ideas, but to discuss values. They built companies that blended profit with purpose, echoing Jack's belief that doing good is the best business. His spirit seemed to linger in the air, not as a memory, but as a rhythm, the heartbeat of a wiser capitalism. Across continents, his message found new homes. In Africa, farmers used Alibaba-inspired platforms to sell crops directly, transforming their lives. In Southeast Asia, young creators built small tech collectives guided by his teaching that every big dream begins small. In Europe and the Americas, executives began inviting mindfulness teachers to boardrooms, a reflection of the very balance Jack once described between progress and peace. But the most profound legacy was invisible. It lived in how people started to see each other again, not as competitors, but as collaborators. Jack's story reminded the world that greatness isn't built in isolation, it grows in community. His lessons softened boardrooms and awakened classrooms. They reminded both dreamers and leaders that ambition without empathy is only half a journey. By the mid-2030s, a quiet cultural shift had taken place. The next wave of innovators no longer aspired to be the richest or the most famous. They wanted to be the most useful. Conferences began with moments of silence. Companies adopted kindness audits alongside financial reports. And on the walls of offices and schools, one simple line appeared again and again. Today is cruel, tomorrow is crueler, but the day after tomorrow is beautiful. Those words became more than a quote. They became a promise. A reminder that struggle and hope are part of the same path. That patience is not waiting, but growing. The very sentence Jack had once spoken to, "Encourage entrepreneurs," now resonated with teachers, doctors, artists, and anyone fighting to build something meaningful in a noisy world. His optimism had become universal. In Japan and South Korea, cultural thinkers began calling this movement the soft revolution. It wasn't a rebellion against capitalism, but a reinvention of it. A world where wisdom was as valuable as innovation, and where kindness was considered an advanced form of intelligence. Jack Ma's story had moved beyond technology and entered the soul of human progress itself. As the movement grew, his name became less a headline and more a philosophy. The Jack Ma way wasn't about building companies, it was about building humans. It taught people that the truest form of leadership is service, and the truest success is inner peace. His story, once told as a tale of triumph, was now studied as a blueprint for balance, how to rise without losing yourself. Even artificial intelligence developers began referencing his wisdom. Many future systems were designed around his human-first principles: empathy, fairness, purpose. Engineers said they wanted machines that could understand why before deciding how. It was a quiet tribute to Jack's lifelong belief that progress without conscience would one day destroy what it sought to improve. In a poetic twist, the digital world Jack helped create began preserving his teachings in the very medium he had once used to change it: video. Documentaries, AI-driven narrations, and immersive experiences carried his voice to every corner of the globe. People in distant countries who had never met him still felt as though they knew him. The calm rhythm of his speech, the warmth of his laughter, the unshakable hope in his words. And yet, perhaps the most beautiful part of his legacy was how ordinary people kept it alive. Taxi drivers quoted him to their children, teachers played his speeches before a class, farmers carved his sayings on the walls of their homes. In every corner of life, from the simplest to the grandest, his wisdom had found belonging. Decades later, historians would call it the circle of wisdom. They described it as the moment when humanity rediscovered its balance between invention and intention. It wasn't a revolution of tools, but of hearts, a gentle turning of the human spirit toward awareness. Jack Ma had planted the seed, but it was the world that chose to let it grow. And so the circle closed. The teacher who once spoke to millions had become part of something larger than himself. His words had dissolved into culture, into conscience, into the rhythm of everyday kindness. He was no longer the center of the story. Humanity was. His journey had started with the dream to change his own life, and ended with the wisdom to help others change theirs. That is the truest circle, the transformation of self into service, of success into silence, of ambition into understanding. In that circle, Jack Ma's spirit continues to move quietly, endlessly, teaching, healing, reminding. That wisdom does not age, does not fade, and does not belong to any one person. It belongs to everyone who dares to believe that a better world can still be built, not by power, but by peace. There is a quiet beauty in how some stories end, not with applause, but with peace. Jack Ma's life did not close with headlines or grand farewells. It simply softened into silence, the way a sunset fades into twilight. For a man who once moved markets with his words, his final legacy was one of stillness, a teacher who had taught enough and finally returned to listen to the world he helped shape. In the years after his retreat, Jack was rarely seen in public. Yet his influence only deepened. The companies he inspired flourished, the schools he founded grew, and the ideas he planted began to blossom in unexpected places. Around the world, people were not just repeating his quotes. They were living them. His message had transcended business. It had become a way of being. Those who visited him described a simple life. A small home near the ocean, a garden he tended himself, and long walks at sunrise. He spoke little about the past. When asked about Alibaba, he would smile and say, "It was never mine. It belonged to the people who built it." When asked about his success, he replied, "Success is only real when you no longer need it." It was the answer of a man who had found what the world's noise could not offer: contentment. Yet even in quiet, he remained a teacher. Children from nearby schools often came to visit, curious about the gentle old man who once ruled the digital world. He would sit with them under the trees, telling stories about his youth, about failure, about dreams, about never losing faith. He no longer taught English or business, but something far greater: patience, kindness, and imagination. The very qualities that technology could never replace. One child once asked him, "Mr. Ma, what's the most important thing to learn?" He paused, smiled, and pointed at the sea. "To flow," he said softly, "like water. It bends, it breaks, it becomes. That's how life should be." The children nodded, not fully understanding, but feeling something true in his calmness. And years later, those same children would recall that moment as the day they learned what wisdom sounds like: quiet, steady, and full of peace. Jack's later writings, though few, carried the tone of a philosopher. He wrote about balance, gratitude, and the delicate harmony between human progress and the natural world. One essay, titled "The Future of Peace," became widely read across Asia. In it, he wrote, "The next revolution is not technological, but spiritual. We must upgrade not our machines, but our hearts." Those words resonated deeply in a century, struggling with meaning. He often said that humanity's greatest invention was not the internet, but kindness. Without it, he wrote, all other inventions will eventually destroy us. That single idea, that compassion must evolve faster than technology, became his final teaching. It was studied in schools, quoted by leaders, and whispered by those who found strength in simplicity. Over time, Jack's quiet philosophy began shaping a new generation of thinkers. They called it soft leadership, the belief that real influence comes not from control, but from empathy. It was the opposite of everything the early 21st century celebrated, and yet it worked. Across the world, companies began reimagining leadership around care and cooperation. The world was slowly rediscovering what Jack had known all along, that progress without humanity is regression in disguise. When the world honored him in absentia for his lifelong contributions, he politely declined to attend. He sent a brief message instead. "Awards are for moments. Meaning is for lifetimes. Thank you, but I already have what I need: time to think, space to grow, and people to love." It was signed simply, "Jack, Teacher." Those two words captured everything his journey had come to mean. As the years drifted on, his story began to take on a mythic quality. People spoke of him the way one speaks of sages, not just for what he did, but for what he understood. His name became shorthand for wisdom, born of imperfection, for the beauty of simplicity, after success. Like a modern Confucius of commerce, he reminded humanity that prosperity without peace is an illusion. Even after his passing, his influence did not fade. In classrooms across the world, young students still hear his voice through recordings and documentaries. Calm, warm, and curious. His words continue to comfort those who fail, to guide those who rise, and to humble those who succeed. The legacy he left was not a company, but a consciousness. And so the story of Jack Ma ends where it began, with a teacher standing before a class, teaching not from textbooks, but from the quiet courage of experience. His blackboard is now the world itself. His lessons are written not in chalk, but in the lives of those who listen. He once said, "A good teacher never truly leaves. They just become the lesson." And perhaps that is the truest way to understand him now. For even though Jack Ma no longer walks among us as the man he was, his wisdom flows through every person who dares to dream with kindness. The teacher has returned not in body, but in spirit, in every voice that speaks gently, in every dream that lifts others, in every act of compassion that reminds us that progress and peace can walk hand in hand. And if you listen closely, somewhere between the sound of waves and the hum of the world, you can still hear him whisper. The same lesson he taught from the beginning. Dream bravely, work humbly, live kindly, and when the world grows too loud, be silent and listen. And as the story of Jack Ma comes to a close, we return to where all stories begin, with the question of what it means to live a meaningful life. His journey reminds us that success is not built on talent or luck alone, but on the quiet persistence to believe when no one else does. He failed more times than most people ever try, and yet each failure became a small stone in the path toward something extraordinary. Jack taught us that dreams are not meant to impress others. They are meant to improve lives. He showed that leadership is not about control, but compassion, that real innovation is not found in machines or markets, but in how we treat each other. The more the world rushed forward, the more he reminded us to slow down, to listen, and to stay human. His story teaches us that purpose is more powerful than profit, that the best ideas come from curiosity, not competition, and that the most successful people are often those who serve quietly, with kindness as their compass. These lessons don't fade with time. They grow stronger each time we choose to live by them. So tonight, as you rest, let these thoughts stay with you. The failures that hurt today may become the foundations of your greatest work. The silence you feel in your struggle may be where your strength is quietly forming, and the dream that keeps you awake may one day wake the world. Because Jack Ma's greatest gift was never Alibaba, nor his wealth, it was the reminder that even the smallest voice, when guided by purpose, can echo across the world. So breathe deeply, rest your mind, and remember, your story is still being written.